Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to wait about another minute just to get a couple more people online. We have 34, so give us one more minute or so and then we'll start, and welcome everyone. Oh, now we're getting a lot of people joining. So we'll give it another 30 seconds or so and then we'll get started. Okay, everyone. Again, good afternoon. If you're just joining us, we waited about a minute to get more people online and we have quite a few attendees, so I think we are safe to get started. I am Rebecca Light. Thank you for joining the webinar. And we're really excited and we're very grateful for your attendance while we go over the discussion draft of the LTCAP guidelines. The draft guidelines, as you know, have been in the works for a couple months, quite a few months at this time. So we plan to go before the commission in March to present the draft guidelines. So again, really excited. Thank you for joining us while we go through everything that we've done so far. And just to let you know, we don't have a presentation prepared. Alika, she's going to give us housekeeping procedures in a minute. She will share her screen, and this is intended to be a conversation. So we will go through page by page, not the whole guidelines. There's 40 pages, but if we can get through the meat of the guidelines today, that would be that would exceed our goal. So that would be great. And then if we don't cover anything today, but you have questions or you have comments, please email me. My contact information is on the website, on the CTC website under the Local Transportation Climate Adaptation Program. So if we don't get to you today, or if we don't answer a question, please do not hesitate to reach out. And we can either schedule a meeting one-on-one, or you can just receive your comments over the phone or through email. So I'm going to stop my camera for a second so I let Alika give you some of our housekeeping procedures.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. So for all of our workshops, we really encourage any sort of interaction with our stakeholders. So there will be opportunities for questions and comments throughout this workshop. You should see the webinar control panel. It's likely located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you'll be able to find the raised hand feature as well as the questions tab. We encourage you to use the raised hand feature as soon as possible, just to give the system time to acknowledge you. Alternatively, you may also use the questions tab to submit your comments. We will read them on your behalf and address those questions following. And as a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and a phone number to access the webinar. These should not be shared with other participants, as it'll create a confusion with staff and in the system. We encourage you to do your best to be concise with your comments, and ask that your comments provide new information. If you agree with someone's comments, simply just make that statement. If you face any sort of technical issues throughout this workshop, please feel free to reach out through the chat or the questions tab, and I'll do my best to assist you. And with that, Rebecca, I'll hand things back over to you.
Excellent, thank you, Alika. And so we can get started. Alika, if you want to share your screen, sure. Page 3, which is the first major page. And again, for anyone who just joined and didn't hear me at the beginning, this is intended to be a conversation. We don't have a PowerPoint prepared, and we we'll draw your attention to specific parts, but this is really intended to be a dialogue between everyone here and commission staff, so we can get all of your comments and feedback during this workshop. I know we sent them out last week on Friday, which may not have been enough time for everyone to see them, but if you have, that is great. So I will feel free to interrupt me as well. Anyone, raise your hand or ask a question in the chat box. So the guidelines begin pretty normally, like all of the other commission programs. There's an authority and purpose section which outlines the funding sources that are available for the LTCAP program, federal protect, and then California's one-time augmentation from the general fund. I do want to draw your attention on the website. There's two versions. There's a remediated version and a non-remediated version that has a couple staff comments. One of those comments is, well, it's in a different section, but it's applicable here. The governor's budget identified a funding swap from the general fund to the state highway account. It would leave unaffected the totality of funding that SB 198 identified, so the full 148 million for the LTCAP program. But that funding swap would then, the eligible activities would be beholden to the state highway account restrictions, which are outlined in the California Constitution. So I just wanted to make everyone aware that that may be coming in July when the new budget is approved. So if we go down to the second page, scroll a little bit more, we have a couple program objectives and goals. I will read the bullet points. So the first objective of the LTCAP is to increase the climate resiliency and protect at-threat transportation infrastructure using California's climate projections, as specified in the Planning and Investing for a Resilient California guidebook for state agencies, prepared by OPR. This is directly reflective of SB 198. The next one is as well. Be consistent with state, regional, or local climate adaptation reports, plans, and the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, the State Adaptation Planning Guide. Another one is developed through outreach to and collaboration with climate vulnerable, underserved, and under-resourced communities related to the project nomination. And then consistent with that state adaptation strategy and Federal Justice 40 initiative requirements. Be consistent with Federal Justice 40, that requires at least 40% of benefits from federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities to advance environmental justice goals. Equitably prioritize the distribution of meaningful environmental and climate resiliency benefits and protects climate vulnerable, underserved, and under-resourced communities, consistent with the state adaptation strategy. And then the last one is provide flexibility for pre-construction activities to the extent that the state funds are available due to federal restrictions from Protect that limit pre-construction activities to 10% of the total available amount for the program that is provided through Protect. So I'll just keep rolling through. I don't see any questions. I don't think I see any hands. So below is the schedule for the program. We plan to present the draft to the commission in March and then present the final guidelines to the commission in May for adoption, for guideline adoption. That would then also trigger a call for projects. And I want to draw everyone's attention to the 6-week turnaround time between the call for projects and when those project nominations would be due. We've also proposed that we will then get our staff recommendations out in September with program adoption in October. And I see a question, but I can't read it. There we go. What is the final, oh, sorry. What is the final implementation date of the project? Teresa, do you want to answer this one?
Um, you know, as Rebecca goes through the programming cycle, it just depends on when your project is programmed, the fiscal year. Then the normal timely use of funds apply. We do have restrictions on our timeline, as you recall, with the general fund. So that will apply. So maybe if once she goes through the programming cycle, it will be more clear. So, okay. And if not, just ask again.
The next question from Amy is, Caltrans cannot apply per page 5, but can they be the lead implementing agency for a project? That's a good question. I don't know that. I don't know. Teresa, do you know if Caltrans can be the implementing agency?
I don't see why not, but that is a very good question that we haven't been asked. So we'll kind of circle back on that one. We have to check with, for the state funds, there is no problem. It's the federal funds that that could be, but yeah, I honestly don't know, but good question.
Carl, can the application deadline extend into July to accommodate for changes to the budget? So here is a problem that we are very much aware of and really trying to find ways to sort of amend the timeline restrictions from both the Protect and the state funds. So our first problem is that by the time we do adopt, we will have already sort of eaten through 2 years of the program. So that then, we have a timeline restrictions we must allocate by June 30th, 2024, especially for the state funds. Everyone will have an extra fiscal year to obligate those federal funds. However, if the state funding swap goes through, the timeline may be pushed back one additional fiscal year, which would be great. But if it's not pushed back, if that funding swap does not occur, or if the funding swap doesn't change the timeline, then if we push back the deadline for applications into July, we wouldn't be looking at programming or adopting the program of projects until December. So
So but Carl, I guess your question is more like, should we cut on our evaluation time to accommodate applicants? I think that's really where you're heading at. Oh. And we could possibly like add another week or 2 at the most, because at this point we really don't know what our universe is out there. If we have similar, which I doubt, similar to the ATP, it will be really impossible for us to be able to evaluate the number of projects. So not knowing it, we kind of played it safe by putting this timeline, but we can possibly add another week or 2 to your deadline, but we can talk about it internally and see what we can do.
And the next one, Mike Woodman, for the projects that we anticipate submitting, Caltrans would be the implementing agency. Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know, Mike. We will just check that Caltrans can be the implementing agency. And the next one from Todd, can you review the difference between the state and federal funding again? Yes, so the first cycle of this program has roughly 50 million per year from the federal Protect. But Protect funds a full 5 years. So what we have proposed when the first workshop took place was splitting up that funding into 2 different cycles. And so that is what we are now, that is how we're going to be running the LTCAP. So the first cycle will encompass 3 fiscal years of around 50 million from the federal government. And then there's a one-time appropriation of 148 million by California from the state general fund to support this program. And so right now there has been a proposed funding swap between the general fund and the state highway account, but that won't be known until the legislature approves the budget in July. So that was all the questions that I saw. So I'm gonna move on, but if there's more, please do ask.
So Rebecca, when
Oh.
I was asking Elika to scroll to section 7 because that's kind of where the funding is. So just as you were speaking, that way it could be seen the funding so that your words match what's in the guidelines.
Excellent. Okay. Yes, thank you. That is helpful.
And Rebecca, we actually have 2 hands raised. So
okay.
I'll actually start with Carl Anderson. Go ahead.
Hey everyone, Carl Anderson with MTC. Teresa, thank you for the clarification on just kind of the timeline of things. And I think maybe cutting into the evaluation period would be beneficial because I'd be nervous that applicants would be basing their applications contingent on what the funding distribution looks like. And so to have applications due potentially before, you know, that the governor signs the actual budget, I would just be a little concerned about that.
Fair enough. I think once we get to the May, hopefully we'll have a better indication, but we can possibly go 1 week or a week and a half. We can probably split the difference.
Okay. Yeah, and just to the same point that you're making, we're in uncharted territory where we don't know what type of applications we're going to, you know, A, put together, and B, the ones that you're going to receive. So I think some fair timeshare there would be very helpful for applicants.
Right. Fair enough.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Carl.
And then Carl, too, just to reiterate too, that funding swap wouldn't affect the total amount provided to the program. It would just put a little bit more restrictions on eligible activities.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we also have a hand raised from Edward Sales. Edward, you are currently self-muted, but should be able to speak.
How about now?
There we go. Hi.
Oh, okay, great. So just a little confused with the title. So this is not technically a Caltrans program, is that correct?
No, this is a California Transportation Commission program.
Okay.
Caltrans does have a protect funding as well, and they have their own program that will go towards the shop projects that are in the shop.
Well, it's also climate adaptation, and we believe Caltrans is proposing to implement the program through the shop, but that's a separate program altogether. But I guess what you're indicating is Caltrans eligible to apply for this program? Is that where your question is leading to?
No, I'm kind of a newbie, and I'm just a little confused because the two names are so similar. That's all.
Yeah, we just have local in our name.
Yeah.
Yeah, one is the state transportation, one is the local. That was so Protect is a federal program that came about through the bipartisan infrastructure law, and then EJA. And so that came as a formula to the states. So California got their share, and then SB 198 was created by the legislature to distribute those funds. And so I don't remember this split. Is it 60% to the state, 40% to the local? And so Caltrans, I believe that's it. 60% is being administered by Caltrans, like Teresa said, implemented through the shop, whereas that 40% came to the local program, and that is the commission's responsibility to administer this program.
Okay.
It took me a very long time to figure out the difference, so you're in good company. Any other hands?
I'm not seeing any other hands, but we have a couple questions that came in through the chat. The first one is from Naila, and she's asking, I'm seeing Justice 40 mentioned 2 times in program goals. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Yes, hi Naila. So the first one, where is it? Oh, I see. Actually, on that what is that? The second bullet, the Appendix B, that Appendix B should actually be bumped to the bullet below. So I appreciate that. But there's the Justice 40 requirements only need to be met for Protect funding, not for the state funding. But we are still, we need to confer with FHWA in terms of how exactly the feds are expecting the Justice 40 requirements to be implemented, and how their climate and equity tool that FHWA is, I think it's through FHWA, that they're developing, how that will work with California specific tools like CalEnviroscreen, which I've done like a very quick comparison between the two tools, and some areas that California deems to be like disadvantage is not considered to be so under the federal tool. So these are questions that we're not too sure exactly how they're going to work in concert, or if there's going to be a separate tool that needs to be used for Protect funding versus the state funding. Does that answer your question, Naila? And again, thank you for pointing that out. That needs to be moved down.
Okay.
No, actually, I do take it back. So the first one, the Justice 40 initiative requirement basically stipulates that outreach to underserved communities needs to occur, which is consistent with the goals of that program, but then also that at least 40% of the federal investments flow to those disadvantaged communities. So I guess it's really not a duplication. They just sort of tackle the two different goals of Justice 40. But we can go back and look at it and make sure that we're not being duplicative.
Okay, and she responded saying, thanks, Rebecca.
You're welcome, Naila.
Okay, so the next question we got is from Hillary Blackerby, and she is asking, the eligibility section is a bit confusing. Are public transit districts eligible for this funding source? It seems transit facilities are eligible facilities, but transit agencies aren't explicitly listed as eligible applicants.
Sorry, let me look at this question again. Public transit districts. We'll actually have to check. The eligible applicants were outlined in SB 198, and this is everything that the legislation outlined. So we'll have to, at least I don't know off the top of my head, Teresa, do you know?
That is a very good question, but to your point, Rebecca, you are correct. The eligible facilities is based on SB 198. As you can see, MPOs are not included here, and that is something that the federal funds are, they're eligible under the federal funds. So that's something we're going to have to look into as well, because we may have to add another category that if it's only federal funds, these are additional agencies that may be able to apply. Good point, though. Thank you.
Okay, our next question is from Aaron asking, for rural agencies whose projects may fall on the state highway system, it will be important to find a way to have Caltrans be the implementing agency.
Yeah, I agree, Erin. So we will get that answer, and we will communicate that with everyone.
Okay, the next question is from Amy asking Section 9 matching requirements. Commission will only consider funds that are not allocated by the Commission on a project-specific basis. For other programs, they have allowed STIP and LPP formula to count. Why not for this one?
Teresa, do you want to take this one?
We could consider STIP, and we could also consider LPP formula. We just kind of wanted to simplify it. But if STIP regional portion is a fund source, I think it is specifically for the rural areas. I understand that a little bit, but we can definitely take a look at that.
Okay, great. And it looks like we have one final question from Angelique asking, what is eligible for funding? Can we have clear examples? For example, projects may include resurfacing with recycled materials, tree planting, etc.
Yeah, Angelique, I think that's a good idea. I think we can add that to the guidelines. The Protect interim or the implementation guidance that the feds put out, they do have some examples. So I think it would be helpful for us to add them into the guidelines for everyone. But for today, my mind is blanking, of course. So I won't be able, I don't know if I'll be able to do it off the top of my head right now, but we will make sure that we put in some examples of eligible projects in the draft guidelines, so applicants get a sense of what would be approved. Okay, I guess no more questions. Angelique, did that answer your question? Are you okay sitting tight while we get some examples together? Okay, perfect. So we will do that. So let me scroll, Alika, since you're controlling it, let's keep scrolling on and we'll keep moving. But again, this has been wonderful. Please just jump in and ask the questions. This is great. So eligible applicants here, we will look for transit districts. Yep, I think that's, we're good. Keep going. Eligible facilities. So these are eligible facilities have been outlined in the Protect program, and so we just took them and pasted them here. So highway projects that are eligible would include roads, streets, parkways, and highways, of course, is the term for the federal government, and so these are what is included in what would be considered a highway. So rights of ways, bridges, railroad, highway crossings, et cetera, et cetera. Tribal transportation facilities. I have a note here for everyone that the eligible facility could be a public highway, road, bridge, trail, or transit system connecting on or provides access to tribal lands that also appears on the National Tribal Transportation Facility Inventory. I reached out to BIA and I haven't heard anything yet, so I might need a new contact because we need access. We wanted to ask if public can access that list to see if the facility that is either located on or connecting to would be eligible. So I'm still awaiting some communication on that. And if anyone here might know the answer or can connect me to somebody at the federal level, well, that would be really helpful. No questions. So we keep going. And then public transportation facilities that might include transit facilities, publicly owned railroads, active transportation facilities, and public parking structures. And then port facilities. Oh, good. We're getting more questions. And then port facilities. And we are still working through if ports would be an eligible applicant. And with the funding swap, they from the general fund to the state highway account, I believe that ports, facilities located in ports would be excluded, but I'd have to check.
Okay. If you're ready for questions, Rebecca, I can step in here. So we got a question from Raven asking, I apologize, I haven't been able to review all of the guidelines yet. Do tribes have a match requirement? And if so, can it be in kind?
Tribes, so tribal applicants would still have a match requirement, and we're going to get to the matching section really shortly. So Raven, if you're okay, I want to put a pin in your questions when we get there, because I want to make sure that we explain it fully. Because we have the two different funding sources, we've proposed that applicants can request that the state funding cover their match. So we'll get there in a second. Sit tight. I think it's like section 8 or 9.
Okay.
And I see Amy has a long question. Do you want to read that one, Alika?
Yeah, I'll take it. So her question is asking, for section 9, matching funds must be expended concurrently and proportionately to LTCAP. Costs incurred prior to allocation will not be counted towards the match. So that was a direct quote from the guidelines, and she's stating, we hope you consider removing this clause as it is disinsensitive to cost savings. Agencies should be rewarded for putting their own funds in upfront to get their projects ready.
Teresa, do you want to take answer Amy's? Well, I guess not really a question, but
yeah, Alika, can you repeat that one more time? I just want to make sure I understood what she said.
Yeah, so she's referencing section 9, where it's talking about matching funds must be expended concurrently and proportionately to LTCAP. Costs incurred prior to allocation will not be counted towards the match. And she stated, we hope you consider removing this clause as it is a disincentive to cost savings. Agencies should be rewarded for putting their own funds in upfront to get projects ready.
So typically with all our projects, it is they're spent concurrently. So if there's a situation where you need your other funds to be spent separately and have only these funds go first, it's not going to work. We want to make sure that well, unless you have a good reason, then we can do non-proportional. But at the end of the project, we're going to have to check proportionality. We want to make sure that whatever local funds you are proposing on the project, those are the local funds that you put on the project. Now, if we have savings, we're all going to get the savings, including this program. So we're not going to maximize this program and have your savings only be in the local funds. It will be the savings across all the funds.
Okay, we received one final question from Philip asking, will NEPA clearance be required? If yes, what agency will be the reviewing agency for the NEPA docs? There is a bit of a catch-22. For example, if a local agency is trying to obtain funding, Caltrans will not consider a NEPA application without first funding having federal funds yet. So we are at a standstill.
Well, that's a good point, but it's no different than any of the other programs that have federal funds, like including like the ATP program or any other program that has the federal funds. So NEPA is required. You cannot obligate, we cannot allocate to a project where environmental hasn't been cleared, because you cannot obligate the project. So I'm not sure how we can help there. I don't know if we need to talk to Caltrans. So we're open to have an offline discussion on that so we can get a better understanding what the issue is on that.
thank you, Teresa.
We have one more question that just came in from Jennifer asking, would you consider doing tiered match? Like if an agency could spend the federal or state funds upfront, and then as the project is finished, pay more of the local match and get to a 20% at the end.
Since we're getting a lot of matching questions, let's scroll down to number 9, which is the matching requirements. Actually, let's go to number 8, because that is important for 9. So So number 8 has state, we want to acknowledge that, you know, we have state only funds for this first cycle. And so a nominating agency can request that their project nomination be programmed for state only funding, not put any of that protect funding on their program. So applicants can request this, any applicant can request it, but the priority for these state only funds will be given, it says rural areas, that needs to be changed to underserved areas, and federally recognized Native American tribal applicants. So there is that state funding, 148 million. Applicants can request that their projects be programmed with just that state funding, and not protect. For number 9, the match requirements, we're doing the same thing. So any project through LTCAP will require a 20% non-federal match. But again, a project nomination or a nominating agency can request that the state-only funds that we have available be utilized to cover their match requirement. And then again, that priority we would be giving to underserved areas and federally recognized tribal applicants. But that is not to say that, you know, like larger, wealthier, like applicants would not be able to have access to this. It would just be dependent upon what the availability of state funds are, and then of course the project nomination, the evaluation score itself too. And then Mike, to answer your question, what the definition of underserved areas are, Appendix G is at the very, very end. There is a glossary. All of the words or all of the definitions in the glossary have been sourced either from federal or state definitions that are in statute, or they have been created from various state agencies, California state agencies, EPA, and then in a very few rare cases, I've had to go to like university groups to get a definition that, you know, doesn't exist in the state statute. But underserved is California defined. So I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it is there.
So we had a couple other questions that came in. One is from Aaron asking, in Section 8, why are the rural areas no longer a priority?
I wouldn't say that rural areas are no longer a priority. Rural areas are absolutely a priority, but something that is the highest priority for both Federal Justice 40 Initiative and California SB 198, you know, directs this program to ensure, you know, collaboration and project benefits for climate vulnerable, underserved and under-resourced communities, which is a much more expansive definition. And so by using underserved, that is not cutting out rural areas. Rather, it's more inclusive of those underserved or disadvantaged areas in larger urban areas. I hope that satisfies your answer. We're hoping to make this more applicable, you know, directly reflecting the legislation and program, the overall program aims of SB 198, and then protect. So.
We got one more question from Angelique asking, can funding cover design and construction?
Yes, funding can. So for this first cycle, because we have the state funds, so Protect has a limitation. No more than 10% of the total program of funds can go towards pre-construction activities. One of the initial reasons why, you know, back in October, we had proposed splitting this program into 2 different cycles was that because we have the state funding, we could potentially program more above that 10% by using the state funds. So we can have more applications for, you know, pre-construction planning or not planning, but PAED or PSNE or right-of-way. We could fund more of those types of activities in this first cycle, whereas in the second cycle, there will be no more state funding available, and it would only be Protect, and then that 10% threshold would be a hard limit. We couldn't go around that at all. So yes, this funding can cover design as well as construction. But construction is the aim of the program. We want to fund as many construction ready projects as possible, but recognize that maybe not a lot of climate adaptation work necessarily has been done, and so we want to use the state funds to provide that flexibility for prospective applicants who may not have those types of projects shovel ready.
Rebecca, can
Yes.
we go back into the earlier question on the tempered match and whether or not we would allow tempered match?
Oh, yes.
Fortunately, this is a federal program, and in order to allow temper match, we would need to get FHWA approval prior to the E76 being processed. So we're not saying no, but it does require an extra step in order for us to allow the tempered match. Okay. Thank you.
Rebecca, we have a hand raised from Yvonne Garcia.
Okay.
Yvonne, you're self-muted.
You hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hey, Teresa, just to let you know, I've done a tapered match through FHWA before on the Highway 70 corridor a long time ago. It really wasn't that difficult to do. Just to let you know.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So
Yeah, you just lay out your financial plan on how the match is going to be fulfilled by the end. That was it.
okay, but
So,
it does require their approval. So yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And that wasn't a lengthy or it wasn't complex. It was a
Okay.
spreadsheet with a cover letter, and that was it.
Okay. Thanks, Yvonne.
But that was, 15, 20 years ago. So that's probably not the case anymore. Anyway, that was it. Thank you.
That's really helpful. So we'll add that to our list of questions for FHWA to see if that is allowable, if that's still the process, and if so, what are the chances of approval? Okay, no more questions right now, so we'll just keep moving on. So I covered state-only funds and matching requirements. Unless anyone wants to go into them more deeply, we can. I'll keep moving on for now. So section 10, we have a funding restrictions. There are two. We have proposed, and we are still so far sticking with that we will not commit more than 30% or 30%, so sorry, 30 million to any project nomination for a single project. And SB 198 says that we shall not do all the funds on one project, and so we have just stuck with 30 million for now. And another funding restriction is that their protect stipulates no more than 40% be provided for new roadway capacity. And so we have applied that 40% across all of the available funding. So that would be programmatically 118.6 million for this first cycle would not, that would be the limit for new roadway capacity if we had that many projects. Mike, I see your question. Alika, could you read that?
Yeah, sure.
I'm having to squint.
Mike's question is asking, what is the timeline for the state climate adaptation program? It seems like it would be strategic to have the timing align with the LTCAP to potentially maximize state and local project funding to implement strategic corridor improvements.
I don't remember what the state program. I think the no, I actually don't know, Mike. So I'll have to check and see when Leah's program is up, or Leah Fisher.
Actually, it is Mike Johnson's, but that is a very good
Johnson.
point, Mike. So we'll look into that and see how we can coordinate our programs so that we can maximize the resources for the agencies.
Yeah. We will ask and find out. And then moving on, just the reimbursement. So the Local Transportation Climate Adaptation Program is a reimbursement program for eligible costs incurred. Cost incurred prior to commission approval, as I think it was Jennifer last time had asked maybe, and are not eligible for reimbursement prior to that approval. Let's move down. So one question for Amy, section 11.
Yeah, so this one says section 11, reimbursement to expedite project implementation. Any flexibility on this, similar to SB 184 for STIP if CTC can provide it?
I will defer to Teresa for this.
Something for us to consider, but I just want you to all keep in mind, I think this is something we have been saying from the very beginning when we first started working on the guidelines, is that the deadlines are pretty restrictive. And we want to make sure we deliver the projects within the framework that we have for the funds, because they have deadlines. So that is really our limitation. And so we can provide all the flexibility we can, but we have to keep in mind that we have deadlines on these funds. Now, if we keep the general fund, those are really strict deadlines. If we get to the state highway account funds, hopefully we can request those deadlines be extended by a year or two. So that kind of gives us a little bit more time. However, for the federal funds, we already lost 2 years. And so we can provide the flexibility, but we need to deliver the projects. We need to be making sure those funds are utilized before we lose them. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa.
We got another question from Gary asking, I understand the grant can be used for design, but I heard NEPA is needed before requesting for funding allocation. If I apply for funding for design only, can I ask for just the state grant and don't have to have environmental clearance prior to the request for funding allocation?
I'm going to take a stab at this one, or unless Teresa, you.
No, go for it, Rebecca, okay. And I'll back you up.
Yeah, well, or correct me. And so, which will probably need to happen. So you can request, Gary, that you want to use the state only funds and take a chance of not getting your NEPA clearance. But if we cannot accommodate, either due to the project score, the evaluation score, or the availability of funding, then that project would not, and you didn't have NEPA clearances, we would not be able to fund that project.
Just also, the NEPA clearance and the CEQA, the environmental clearance, has to be done by the time you allocate. You request an allocation. So for programming, you don't have to have NEPA clearance for programming, but remember the deadlines are very strict. If you don't request an allocation and it's not clear, we're dropping your project because we're going to try and get projects allocated as soon as possible. So for programming, you don't need to have environmental clearance. For allocation, you do.
Yeah, and again, that general fund needs to be allocated before next June 30th. So June 30th, 2024. If the funding is not allocated by then, it would be taken back. Okay. Any other questions, Alika?
I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised.
Okay. So we can go to section 3. It's the evaluation section on the next page. And so the LTCAP program mirrors many of the other CTC competitive programs. That there is a screening criteria. And so these screening criteria are directly reflective of requirements in SB 198. And so there are 4 screening criteria. The first is the identification of at least one projected climate threat that will pose a risk to the transportation infrastructure by 2050. And there are a suite of climate tools that we want to direct applicants to use for this program in Appendix C. We're still coordinating with our partners and our other state agencies like OPR. So we'll get more clarification on how to direct applicants to use these tools if they haven't been used before. And so that there'll just be more information, but at a later date. So moving on to B, identification of the climate vulnerable, under-resourced, or underserved communities. Again, those are all defined in the glossary appendix, who will be directly impacted by the climate threats effects on that at-risk transportation infrastructure. And then the data tools in Appendix D are the supporting, sorry, I want to say supporting evidence, but is the tools that you would need to use to identify those communities. C, consistency, that the project nomination is consistent with an adopted RTP and SES if within the bounds of an NPO. The consistency with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research Adaptation Planning Guide. Consistency with the climate resiliency and environmental justice goals of the region, if there are any. And then other regional or local climate adaptation plans or reports if applicable. So if you're a city and your city also has an adaptation plan or some sort of report, then your project nomination would need to be consistent with that, whatever is in that plan. And if there isn't one for the local, but there is one for the region, then you would point to that plan or report to demonstrate consistency. And if none of them exist, then it is not applicable to the project nomination. So that is just the screening criteria. That is a pass-fail. That is, we're envisioning the applicants just, check at each box that, yes, I've done these. That is the screening criteria. But if it fails the screening criteria, then the project nomination would not be evaluated. So moving on to the project nomination or the project rating process. Similar to other CTC programs, there will be scores assigned via high, medium, low, and low ranking. And then so only the highest ranking project nominations would be recommended for programming in the LTCAP. Moving on to the next page, 14. Oh, something else, SB 198 asks for the consideration of climate equity. And so the guidelines say right above 14, that last one sentence, in approving funding for inclusion in the program of projects, the Commission may consider geographic balance within the programming cycle, simply to ensure that no one region or one area is particularly dominating the program. We want to make sure that there is a climate equity distributed throughout this program. So for example, if all of the projects submitted are in Southern California and 2 in Northern California, we would want to make sure that depending on project evaluation scores and everything, that some of that funding would be equitably distributed throughout the state as much as possible. So section 14 is the evaluation criteria. We will go through these, and again, almost directly reflective of SB 198 requirements. So there's 4 sections in the evaluation criteria. The first section is the climate threat impact to the transportation infrastructure that your project nomination is seeking to address, and then the climate vulnerable communities. So the first in A is we would like applicants to discuss the risks to that transportation infrastructure from the climate threat that was identified in the screening criteria. So for example, you have a lot of rain, and you can show via CalAdapt that your region by 2050 will experience 5 inches more rain per year. And your facility, already experiences flooding, and that extra 5 inches would be, for example, catastrophic to the facility. So that is what we would like applicants to discuss, how that climate threat would impact that transportation infrastructure, and then how the damage or recurring failure of that asset would affect various metrics such as statewide and regional mobility, economic opportunities, goods movement, and the environment or natural resources. And then for the climate vulnerable community, how those communities are impacted if that transportation asset were to fail or if there were to be recurring damage. And so describe impacts to safety, public health, and well-being, including potential displacement of communities and individuals. And then describe impacts to cultural resources, including tribal, if that is applicable. The next is B, and this is when we start talking about project benefits. So applicants are directed to discuss or explain how the proposed project will increase the climate resiliency of that at-risk transportation infrastructure. We are requesting that applications include the comparisons of the historical baselines and any of the modeled projections. Some of the tools that are outlined have this, and so that is what our continued conversations with OPR will be making sure, like if one of the tools does not have a baseline year, how do we, ask applicants to demonstrate what their area is currently experiencing or has experienced historically. The next, moving on, is explain how that proposed project would increase the transportation system's ability to preserve, enhance, or protect each of the following, both locally and regionally or statewide. So mobility, accessibility, economic development and vitality, goods movement. Moving on to the next page, you also have environmental or natural resources, the safety of adjacent communities and all users of the transportation system, not only those climate vulnerable communities, but every community that uses or is affected by that transportation infrastructures, by your project nomination, I should say. And then cultural resources again, and other critical infrastructure if applicable. I'm going to pause here because I see comments and questions coming in. So Alika, I will pass it to you. Or if maybe I'm not seeing anything. Oh yeah, I am.
I don't think I'm seeing anything coming on my end unless you've received something in the chat.
Are there any specific CEQA outreach resolution or other requirements? Let me keep going through these, Angelique, and then let me know if I don't answer one part of your question or any parts of your question. Moving along for the evaluation criteria, C is we ask applicants to explain the environmental equity of the project. So explain how your proposed project incorporates environmental equity and directly benefits those climate vulnerable, underserved, and under-resourced communities. Same as ATP, for a project to qualify as directly benefiting one of these communities or all of these communities, the project needs to either be located within or within a reasonable proximity to those communities, have a direct connection to the communities, or be an extension or a segment of a larger project that connects to or is directly adjacent to the community. Here we also ask that applicants describe how anti-displacement policies and actions are being implemented within the project. And then the last, going to Angelique's question, outreach, there's a community engagement section. And so, based upon those communities that were identified earlier and discussed throughout the application, we ask that applicants describe the process used to identify those communities' mobility needs, the public outreach, engagement, and collaboration activities performed during the project development, and how that engagement will continue to be carried forward throughout the implementation of that project, and explain how community input was received and incorporated into the project. So were there any specific elements that the community requested, and if so, were they incorporated? And if not, if yes or no, why or why not and how. And then the last is identify strategies included in the project scope that seeks to avoid or minimize impacts as determined by or through the collaboration with community members. So that can look like anything depending on your project and your region and the communities that you are engaging with. So these are fairly open-ended. Hopefully will not be too burdensome to answer, because if you're already doing this outreach, these hopefully will be something that's already documented that you can begin pulling and using in your project nomination narrative. I'll pause here for now. Yes.
Okay, perfect. I was just going to say, we got a question in from Todd asking, is there a time frame requirement for the community engagement? An example needs to be completed within X amount of days, weeks, or months of the application submittal.
So we have not identified any sort of time frame, like all of your outreach needs to be done 6 months prior, because community outreach is something that, you know, will hopefully have been done during the development of the project, and is something that is being continuously communicated and engaged. So to answer your question directly, Todd, no, there is not a time frame requirement. But we hope that within your application narrative, you demonstrate that, you know, the work has started, how it was started, how it has, you know, been incorporated into the project. We do want to make sure that these projects, consistent with Justice 40 and SB 198, they're really serving the needs of that community and not from a top-down approach. If you don't live in that community, then you don't know the needs of that community. And you really can only ascertain that through really robust, meaningful, and, you know, considerate, like, outreach to any of those communities, you know, climate vulnerable, underserved, under-resourced. So I hope that answers your question, Todd. And if not, please let me know. Any other questions, Alika, that I might have missed, or hands?
I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised.
Okay, we'll move on. Section 15 is additional evaluation criteria. And we're making good time, everybody. We still have an hour left, so this is great. We don't need to rush through if we don't need to. So there's additional evaluation criteria. These evaluation criteria are not meant to subtract from the evaluation score that has been, you know, applied thus far. These are just bonus questions, but we do ask applicants answer them, and failure to do so, you know, may affect whether or not the project is included in the program. So SB 198 says that the program may consider reductions to GHG and VMT, and so we've added them in the additional evaluation criteria. We just ask that applicants identify and describe how the proposed project or elements in the project would, you know, reduce GHG emissions, criteria pollutants, and advance the state's air quality goals. And then also VMT, reduction of VMT, and identify project strategies or elements that reduce VMT. We had a question, not right now, but earlier I want to address. So even though the project, this program does allow for capacity increasing projects, the narrative should still demonstrate reduction of VMT. How you do that is up to you and your agency and your partnerships, but I, you know, would hope that there would be collaboration with, for example, with your transit district or your transit, you know, local transit agency, or some other strategies, however, you know, applicant determines, to show that there are VMT reduction strategies employed. So the increase, a capacity increasing project does not necessarily exclude an applicant from being able to answer this or be awarded points in this section. We had a pro-housing goals, and we have altered that slightly in response to stakeholder feedback. So this is reflective of some of the other CTC programs. that have, instead of pro-housing as a evaluation criteria, it is a more holistic transportation, land use, and housing goals section. So there's a regional and a local component. For the first, the project nomination should explain how the project will advance transportation, land use, and housing goals within the region as identified in the RTP-SES, if applicable, and your regional housing needs allocation. This may also include demonstrating how the project will support or align with the region's REAP or Regional Early Action Planning grant investments, or other regional planning or implementation efforts that are ongoing or planned. And then also there's a local component. So the project nomination should explain how the project will advance local transportation, land use, and housing. This could include demonstrating at the time of application that the local jurisdiction has submitted its housing element annual progress report to the state of California for the current and prior year, or by demonstrating the local jurisdiction has applied to a Department of Housing and Community Development's pro-housing designation program, and that they meet pro-housing criteria to support efficient land use. And then if housing is not a concern for the local jurisdiction, we ask for a detailed explanation, including an accounting of the jurisdiction's assigned local share of RHNA. And so that is a fairly long section, or rather like sub-criteria, but if you have applied to other CTC programs, this should not come as a shock or look new at all. And then the last additional evaluation criteria is the cost effectiveness. Applicants should demonstrate how their proposed project would provide positive benefits in relation to the total costs of the project, or at least the costs sought underneath the LTCAP. I will stop there for right now, just to take stock of questions or if there's any hands raised.
Yeah, so we actually have a hand raised from Mike Woodman. Mike, you are self-muted.
Thanks. Yeah, this is Mike Woodman with Nevada County Transportation Commission. Really appreciate the effort that went into the guidelines. It's very helpful. The one comment, I wanted to make on the additional evaluation criteria, it's important to acknowledge or recognize that, depending on the type of resiliency project, it may not be a clean fit. For example, reduction of GHG. If you're upsizing culverts to address washout or flooding on a particular section of highway or roadway, or wildfire evacuation, adding shoulders that could be used for additional evacuation egress. Not all of those things neatly align with the reduction of VMT, reduction of GHG, or the transportation, land use, and housing goals. And I know in the transportation, land use, and housing goals section, there are some examples of kind of some methods of meeting that through the jurisdictions, reporting on their efforts. But just want to make that point that there's not always going to be a clean fit when we're talking about resiliency and climate adaptation, the type of projects. So in some of these cases, I think the regional agency should be able to make that case for why their project isn't necessarily the clean fit for that specific criteria, and still meet the qualifications.
Yes, thank you, Mike. I really, really appreciate your comment. And I want to point out for everyone here that yes, I absolutely support what you said. That is very true. Sometimes your project you can't support your housing needs because you are, just removing some surface water from a transportation facility, right? How does that align? But I would encourage anyone who is applying to at least be able to speak to these questions. And like you said, Mike, it's, say, well, this project isn't directly applicable. However, this is what our city or our region is doing. This is, a lot of, I don't know, I would guess this demonstrating ongoing activities that do speak to transportation, land use, and housing in your area or that your agency is doing. And just so then evaluators down the road get a sense of, what this project would do. And even if it doesn't directly support, these goals, how it connects in some way, how the agency is being thoughtful and mindful of how everything is working together.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Alika?
Yeah, so we got a question from Rachel regarding GHG and VMT criteria, and she felt Mike did a good job explaining her concern, but I'll go ahead and read her question anyways. She's asking, will this prevent climate adaptation and resiliency projects focused on preserving existing infrastructure and natural habitats, fish passage, etc.?
Sorry, yes. So I'm gonna just point back to what I said, and you said, Rachel, that Mike did a good job explaining. Hopefully, I did a good job of answering Mike. But then also to say too that remember these are like additional evaluation criteria. They're not going to take away from the score that has been assigned, in the evaluation criteria. That section, what is that? Section 14. Whatever is not answered, or you say, well, my fish passage, doesn't meet the level of, demonstration that, it's supporting our housing goals, right? But again, anything that you can do to point to the work that your agencies are doing or how this can support in any way, that is really what we're looking for, making sure that nothing is sort of done in a black box and that everything is done with consideration of all of the other work that's ongoing, to demonstrate that this is like a holistic sort of project that's going to influence climate resiliency and then all those other downstream effects, right? Like safety, getting people, to certain like other land uses or being able to use that transportation facility even in times of climate events or increased climate disturbances, I suppose. Lots of rain, lots of heat. Anything else? If not, we can move. This concludes the evaluation portion, and then the rest will be going into the programming part of the program.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised.
Excellent. Okay, so let's keep rolling along. So section 16 it deals with the programming funds. And so the LTCAP will be developed consistent with estimated federal and state funding levels. There's no guarantees, minimums, or targets for this program, except for federally recognized tribal governments, which I don't remember if we covered in section 7, but there's a 5% set aside for tribal applicants in this program, which was included after stakeholder feedback. Project nominations will be evaluated again on section 14 and 15 in the guidelines. The commission may at any time of programming or allocation approve non-proportional spending. Adjustments must be made at project closeout to ensure matching funds were spent proportionally to the commission approved LTCAP program at the time of programming. Implementing agency must provide a project funding plan through construction that demonstrates all of the funding in that plan. The state, local, federal, private sources is reasonably expected to be available and sufficient to complete that project. The commission may program for the LTCAP funds all phases of a capital project, which is PAED, PSNE, right-of-way, or construction. Any questions in section 16?
I'm not seeing any hands raised or questions come in.
All right, moving along to section 17, committed funds. The commission will program funding to projects in whole thousands of dollars and will program a project phase only if it finds that the phase is fully funded through the program or other funding. I am going to skip the rest of 17. It is pretty, unless Teresa, you want me to go through it, but I think it's fairly, it matches, it mirrors a lot of the other
Yeah.
CTC programs.
Yeah, just no, I think you're right. You can skip that.
Okay. Delivery methods, again, same, there's no changes to the LTCAP in relation to other CTC programs, so I might skip unless there's a question. I see something.
Yeah, there is a question from David asking, does the 10% cap on pre-construction activities apply to the design build projects as described in section 18 on page 15 of the draft guidelines?
Yes,
Yes,
it does.
Yeah, David, it does apply.
I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised at this time.
Thank you for that question, David. We will keep going, but again, stop me at any point. We'll go into 19. So to answer a question we had earlier about NEPA, projects programmed in the LTCAP will need to comply with CEQA and, if applicable, through those protect funds, NEPA. So allocation requests section, sorry, I see one, Jennifer. Reimbursement, section 11.
Yeah, so she's asking, can you please clarify reimbursement section 11, wondering if agency needs signed program supplement form or supplement before costs are eligible for reimbursement?
Teresa, would you handle, would you be able to answer Jennifer?
I didn't quite get that. Can you repeat that, Alika? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. She's asking, wondering if agency needs signed program supplement before costs are eligible for reimbursement, or is it eligible after commission approval?
It's a commission allocation. All our programs, you can start incurring costs after allocation. Now, keep in mind, you may not be able to get reimbursement after all the agreements have been signed and in place with Caltrans.
Thank you, Teresa.
I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised.
Let me scroll back to where I was. Okay, we'll keep moving on. I think we're on 20. So allocation requests. When an agency is ready to implement a project, the agency will submit an allocation request to Caltrans. Again, mirrors other programs, so I won't read the rest of it. Fairly standard, no real changes made. Section 21 is the allocation review process. Again, same as the other programs. 20, the allocation requirements is the same as all the other programs. Timely use of funds. The Commission expects certain deadlines to be met as program projects are implemented. If the deadlines are not met and a time extension is not approved before the expiration of that deadline, then the project will be deleted from the program. Deadlines. So here are the deadlines for the LTCAP. The allocation deadline, an allocation for the program project phase must be requested in the state fiscal year in which those funds are programmed. Funds programmed to a project expire June 30th of the state fiscal year in which the funds are programmed. An allocation request must be placed at a commission meeting agenda no later than the June commission meeting. And if program funds are not allocated within that year that the project is programmed, then the project would be deleted from the program. Contract award deadline, construction contracts must be awarded within 6 months of an approved allocation. Pre-construction expenditure deadlines and allocation of a pre-construction phase, or sorry, after allocation of the pre-construction phase, an implementing agency has a year of allocation plus 2 additional state fiscal years to complete the pre-construction phases. And the implementing agency must invoice Caltrans for these costs no later than 180 days after that expenditure deadline. Project completion deadline after award of the construction phase contracts, and implementing agency has up to 36 months to complete those the contract or contracts. The implementing agency must invoice Caltrans for these costs no later than, again, 180 days after the expenditure of completion deadline. Extensions. So this is the section where we talk more about, you know, the proposed funding swap of the general fund to the state highway account. The guidelines were written with expectation that that funding swap would occur, and so those or these upcoming extension deadlines are included. The caveat, however, if you scroll down a tiny bit, Alika, to the next page, keep going a little bit more, right here. If that funding swap does not occur and we are not able to get an extension on the general fund allocation and expenditure deadlines, then we will have to revisit these extensions, and they may not be allowable for any projects that utilize those state funds. We want to put that out there as a disclaimer for everybody to be aware of. We did our best to hammer that point home, but we might need to do that more in the guidelines, just to make sure that everyone is fully aware that, you know, the state funds under a very, very, very strict timeline, depending on that funding source. So right now, if that funding swap does occur, we are saying that for allocation, contract award, expenditure, and for project completion, all may be requested for a maximum of 12 months. And again, if that funding swap doesn't occur, it may be no extensions allowed, depending. We don't know just yet.
Also, Rebecca, just to add to that, if the funding swap occurs and we're able to get an extension, so that is important to the funds. We're trying to see if we can get those funds extended. The swap may occur, but the timing may not. So that's the big one right there.
Thank you, Teresa. We will keep going to amendments. I'm going to skip this section. Nothing is particularly different about this section compared to all the other CTC programs, or competitive programs, I should say. Project cost savings, no changes made to this section. It's all pretty consistent with all of the other programs that CTC has. And then section 6, the reporting. So project reporting. The Commission's accountability and transparency guidelines are currently being drafted for an update. And so we have proposed that the LTCAP would adhere to some of those requirements in the Commission's accountability and transparency guidelines. The link would take you to the draft that's on the website right now. Not everything would be applicable, only certain sections. I need to pull up my notes very quickly. So one thing that we want to draw your attention to, within that draft update to the SB1 accountability and transparency guidelines, the applicability of the section that talks about the SB1 program accountability, project performance analysis, the applicability of that section would apply to the projects in the LTCAP. That we have not yet determined exactly what those reporting metrics might look like, but it would be, you know, directly reflective of or at least potentially be directly reflective of the evaluation criteria. So we would be asking all applicants 5 years after project closeout to then report on the project, and if that project met the intended goals of the program, and what applicants had identified as being a goal for them for that project. So, increase climate resiliency, protect at-risk communities or infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. Again, yes, Teresa.
I have a
Yes.
question for you, for us here, for us. Would it be useful for us to include in this section the sections that are applicable to the program from the accountability and transparency guidelines?
Yes, we do need to add that in after today's workshop.
I think that will be useful for all the applicants to know which sections of the accountability and transparency guidelines are applicable for this program, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Please, anyone tell us otherwise, but it would probably be best if we did that, so you won't have to go finding all of that information yourself. Any questions about this section before we move on?
We did receive one question from Kyle asking, is there a max number of applications per agency?
No, Kyle, there is not a max number. What we do, I think it's section 13, we ask that if there are multiple project nominations submitted by an agency, that the agency identify the priority order of those project nominations.
Should we have a maximum? That's a question for our stakeholders.
Yeah, we hadn't considered that, had we? Putting a cap on the number of applications. So if anyone thinks that there should be a cap or shouldn't be a cap, please let us know. So right now there is not a cap. We just ask all applicants to identify, which order is from highest to lowest priority would be assigned to each of those project nominations. So staff just knows during evaluations which is the highest.
I'm not seeing any other questions, comments, or hands raised.
Perfect. Thank you, Alika. Amendments will go down to section 26. We're almost done with the guidelines. I won't read all of these here because they have not changed for the LTCAP specifically in relation to many of the other CTC competitive projects. Project cost savings, no changes or no significant proposed policy to draw anyone's attention to. Oh, did I go backwards? Right, I did. Project reporting, covered that. And project, so section 29, project auditing, 30, project signation, and 31, Title 6 requirements are all fairly standard boilerplate, and so nothing particular to call your attention to here. I had not planned on going through any of the appendices, but we have 30 minutes still until the end of this workshop. So, Teresa, should I just go through them, or should we just ask if anyone wants us to go through them? Because we don't need to if nobody wants to.
Maybe just briefly in general, just kind of go through just the tools and that's it, because I think those are going to be the most important ones so that they can be able to make sure that their projects are consistent with those tools.
Okay.
Just very, very, very general,
okay.
High level.
Yeah. Alika, could you scroll all the way down page 28?
Sure.
And that begins section 7 for the appendices. So the first appendix is just the EPPR form that is required to accompany the project nomination. So fairly standard. The next is Appendix B. This is our equity supplement and resources appendix. So it has example community engagement strategies. We hope to be helpful to applicants, as well as information on Justice 40, the federal initiative, and the a link to FHWA just for more information should applicants need it. Scroll down, we'll do Appendix C. So this is going to be useful for applicants in answering their screening criteria question and when developing their project for this program or the project nomination for this program. So SB 198 says that the projects, the project nominations must use California climate projections consistent with the OPR guidance, Planning and Investing for a Resilient California, a guidebook for state agencies. That resource is linked here at that appendix. That is a very wonderful resource for all applicants to LTCAP, even though it says a guidebook for state agencies. It has a lot of information and best practices, and so we are directing applicants to use that and develop or rather I should say identify those climate threats to their region using one of the tools here. So you can there's CalAdapt, and I forget how many are there, but I think it's like 15 different climate tools that you could use to look at your area's projected impacts from precipitation, snowpack, number of days with high heat, sea level rise, etc. There's also the Climate Change Indicators Report, which came out in 2018, so a little dated, but I mean, it's still applicable for this program, and it's still useful. Has a lot, again, a lot of information for regions to use that you could use that instead to look at your projected climate threats. And then there's also Cosmos, which is that coastal storm modeling system developed by the USGS. The Our Coast, Our Future hazard map is a California specific map that uses Cosmos, so you can zoom in on your area and look at the projection of sea level rise, and there's a few others, cliff retreat, I believe. So these are the tools that we are directing applicants to use and then identify their climate threat, their projected climate threat. I'll stop here. Are there any questions for appendix? Well, A, B, or C, but C really.
I don't know that we have any questions regarding the appendices, but we do have two questions or comments that came in regarding the maximum number of applications. So we got one comment from Bruce stating maybe not a cap on the number of applications, but a cap on the amount of the fund that any one agency can be awarded. And then we received, another comment from Jenny stating under section 10, funding restrictions, item A states there is a max of $30 million for a single project. If there is no limit on how many applications can be submitted, is there a limit on how much a single agency will be awarded?
Very sneaky, Jenny. I like it. I had not considered that. We'll have to, so right now, no, there is not a limit. We have not identified a limit to any one agency being awarded. That dovetails nicely into what Bruce had suggested, that potentially we put a cap. So if, we've been proposing, and we are still proposing a funding cap of 30 million per project. What do you all think? Should there be a cap on
But, Rebecca,
agencies? Yeah.
In your guidelines, you do state that we're going to try and achieve geographic balance. So I think to the extent we can, that is that is going to be our job to make sure that the funds are distributed evenly across the state, and no one single agency is going to be benefiting more than others. So, but that is something good for us to kind of consider as well.
Okay, so we've gotten a lot more comments in. We have another one from Kyle stating, will applicants be given an opportunity to vet application ideas with CTC staff? This could help agencies prioritize their best applications and increase application quality.
Yes, Kyle, we will be posting some office hours, I suppose, for lack of a better word, office hours for prospective applicants to contact us, and then we can sit down and talk about your potential project and how it may or may not fit for LTCAP. So yes, that will be posted at a later date, but before those applications are the call for projects go out. So that would happen before May, the end of May.
Okay, we got another comment from Josephine stating, what is the likelihood that major changes to the screening and evaluation criteria and needed submittals will occur between the draft and final versions of these guidelines?
I don't know about the likelihood. Teresa,
None.
okay, I was gonna say they're pretty much set for right now. We might need to
Right.
tweak them here or there, but
Well, and not only that, but those are really statutorily driven. So, you know, a wordsmithing here and there, possibly, but those are really what SB 198 requires, and it's also consistent with the PROTECT program. So, yeah, I don't see us making major changes to those sections.
thank you, Teresa.
Okay, so back to the CAP, it looks like we have a couple comments left over trickling in. So we have one from Hillary stating, only one project award per agency, please. And then we have another comment from Carl stating, I don't think a CAP is needed since statute is already directing geographic balance. And then Mike stated $30 million seems to be low and may limit meaningful projects. And then we also have one hand raised. Bill, I just unmuted you. You should be able to speak. Bill, did you have a question or comment?
Oh, yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
hi,
we
Bill.
can hear you.
What is the what are the time frame now to get on the commission's agenda?
You mean for the draft guidelines to be presented?
Well, for the projects to be included on the commission's agenda.
So the program of projects and the projects that the commission will, or that commission staff will recommend for funding, that will take place at the October commission meeting.
How much time do we need to get it on the agenda? We had an issue with the ATP projects of the amount of time that we were given to do that.
So normally, let me jump in here. So once the project has been programmed or the funding has been committed in this program, then you follow the same schedule that Caltrans has to getting the commission's agenda for allocations or any actions you need from the commission. So I invite you to look at the Caltrans's internal calendar for getting those items in the agenda. Unless it's going to be coming from us, then that's a different story. But normally it comes through Caltrans. So we invite you to contact the CTC liaison's office at Caltrans.
Okay.
Okay, we have one more hand raised, and this is Mike. Mike, go ahead.
This is Mike Woodman with Nevada County Transportation Commission again. Was looking at Appendix D and, looking at identifying the underserved populations. Maybe I dismissed it, but I was curious, are we also looking at the federal, kind of the new federal way of looking at things, identifying the areas of persistent poverty as well as historically disadvantaged communities?
This is something that we are still wanting to work out with FHWA because we don't know, or at least I don't know as of yet how these tools will be incorporated. I don't know if the feds want us to use their tool or if, CalEnvirusScreen is simply good enough. We're not too sure just yet. So it's Appendix D sort of has everything in the kitchen sink as of right now. Some of these tools might be taken out or some might be promoted in favor over others. I just don't know just yet, Mike. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. And, for most rural areas, CalEnvirusScreen isn't a good fit. Although, most of our kind of underserved populations are captured under AB 1550. But when you also use the federal tool and look at the areas of persistent poverty and historically disadvantaged, there's also a lot of those areas within the rural areas of the state.
Okay, thank
Just a
you.
comment.
That'll be
Yeah.
useful for us in our conversations with FHWA.
Right, and also, Mike, just keep in mind that all these tools are just to assist you. I think there's a lot of latitude for you to make a case for the population in your region as well. So I do invite you to kind of take a look at that and see what best fits your region.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that, because when I read through the guidelines, my takeaway was you have to use, those tools in the appendix, and it kind of limited, it seemed like it limited the flexibility, but if there is that flexibility beyond just what's listed, that would be great.
To your point, Mike, so this may or may be updated once we talk to FHWA and find out, what tools to use or what they want us to use, especially for those protect funds. But Appendix D spans 2 pages, and on the very bottom of that second page, there regional definitions are allowed. So if your region has adopted a definition, that had been developed through public outreach, and it was adopted as part of your RTP, or RTP SES, then that is also allowable, which sort of allows for that greater capture of areas that may not be, reflective or reflected in any of the tools too. I just wanted to draw everyone's attention.
Yeah, and just in my opinion, I think with Senate Bill 198 implementing the program in California, that there would be some kind of flexibility to use both state definitions as well as kind of the federal tools and definitions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions on what was that, Appendix A, B, C, or anything, but anything specific for those, and we can move on to Appendix D?
It looks like we have 2 more questions that came in. We have one from Angelique asking, when we work with a special district county and they need authorizing resolutions to accept funds, does this program require authorizing resolutions?
Teresa, do you?
I'm not really quite sure. Maybe she can unmute herself and kind of explain that to us a little bit.
Sure. Angelique, you're currently self-muted if you want to come off mute and speak to your question more.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, so I'm Nick. I work with a consulting company and I work with special districts county. Usually we have to do authorizing resolutions for for example, State Water Resource Board to accept funds for drinking water state revolving fund, like that's for an example. But for anytime we need to apply for grants for projects, we always have to get authorizing resolutions for them to like accept the money and then use the money. So that's why I'm wondering, like, oh, does this program also need an authorizing resolution, or like, can we include it?
Yeah, you do need a resolution from your governing board to authorize you to apply for the funds. So normally that's part of the normal process, if I'm understanding it well. Or are you talking about permitting agencies that you need permits? I'm not really sure I understand.
Hi, no, it's okay. I think you answered my first question.
Okay, if
Yeah,
not, you can call us offline and we can have a conversation so we can better understand your concern, okay?
okay, thank you. Yeah, there's usually like templates or like pre-authorized documents for us to just send over to our client. That's why I'm like, oh, do you guys have that? But thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Angelique. Anything else, Alika, before we move on?
Yeah, we have one final comment or question from Naila asking, I have a question on the evaluation criteria. Do you have both quantitative and qualitative components in the scoring criteria?
Are you saying the screening criteria or the scoring?
Let me see if she wants to come off mute. Give me 1 second. Naila, if you wanted to come off mute and further explain.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Yeah, I was mentioning about the evaluation criteria. So, did you consider both qualitative and quantitative components?
So the screening criteria has a quantitative component, which is the projected climate threat using the tools that we went over in Appendix C, so CalAdapt, Cosmos, etc. So that is where that quantitative component comes in. But the rest of the scoring criteria right now is mostly talking to qualitative assessments, pretty much narrative driven. We had wanted to make this fairly accessible to applicants, especially if, you know, agencies had not had a chance to apply to a climate adaptation program before. We didn't want to make it very onerous and ask for a bunch of science or a bunch of quantitative metrics that maybe agencies don't know how to do or don't have the capacity to do. But for stakeholders, is the approach that we've taken so far good? Like, is it good? Do you think it'd be fairly easy for your agency to also have to answer more quantitative questions? Because I can certainly add those in, but we wanted to make it as easy and approachable as possible.
No, I think it sounds logical because you need to cover both qualitative and quantitative, and also normally like project narratives, qualitative based components are much more in compared to the quantitative in any guideline, any other program guidelines also. So I think that sounds logical, and it should be like it will be easier for the applicants also to follow and maintain all the requirements. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I will move on unless there's any more questions.
Nope.
And we're still on time, so this is great. So Appendix D, climate vulnerable communities data tools. These are all of the tools that applicants can use to support their project nomination to demonstrate that the proposed project would, directly benefit the climate vulnerable, underserved, under-resourced communities. So Cal EnviroScreen may be used, the California Department Free or Reduced Price Meals. I left this in for now, even though the state of California has wonderfully provided free meals for all school children, regardless of income. I left this in for now because this data is still available and is still, I have to check to make sure, but I'm pretty sure that the data is still reflective of communities that are maybe climate vulnerable, underserved, under-resourced. California Healthy Places Index, there's also an extreme heat edition in that tool. If your application or project focuses on increasing climate resiliency to extreme heat, that might be a good tool to support your project nomination for those communities. There's the federal tool, I put it in there. Again, not quite sure if that would need to be used for everything. We will figure that out as we go along and update the guidelines accordingly. You also have the climate change and health vulnerability data. That resource was developed through the Department of Public Health and is there for you to use if needed. Median household income, Native American tribal lands, and again, I mentioned it earlier, but a regional definition, if it fits the parameters outlined here, that can also be used to support your project nomination. Appendix E, we have anti-displacement resources for applicants in case they have not had to think about anti-displacement before. Here are some fairly good starting points. And it covers not only transportation projects, but also those projects that like fish passages, right, have natural infrastructure components. The greening without gentrification study from UCLA is a very good resource to help applicants connect. Well, I have a project that, you know, won't displace. How do I show that? That is a very good resource. Scrolling down to the last two, Appendix F, I wanted to just sort of give any additional resources applicants might find useful, especially if you have not done any climate adaptation work before, or have applied to a climate adaptation program like this before, because this is a new program and there hasn't really been one before like this. So just extra resources for everybody with accompanying descriptions of what the website or tool might show you or do and how it could be useful. And then the very last Appendix G is a glossary. There's a lot of new terms that SB 198 and Protect have, and so we wanted to make sure that we are starting from a place of consistency and everyone is working from the same definition. And so we wanted to make sure that we included this glossary. Not all encompassing, but we've done our best. If you think that there's something that needs to be added, please let us know. If you are using a different definition for one of these, again, I really want to know, please reach out and let us know where, how you're using that definition and like where you got it from would be helpful. That takes us through the entire draft guidelines that we have sent out and prepared. So I will stop for a second just to see if there's any questions. We're almost at time. We have 8 minutes left.
Rebecca, we do have one hand raised at this time. Denise, you are self-muted if you want to make a comment.
Hi, Rebecca. This is Denise from OCTA. I just wanted to clarify something that I saw on the guidelines. So in the eligible facilities, I see that there's publicly owned railroads are okay, but then Section 6 under at-risk coastal infrastructure talks about non-rail infrastructure. So I just kind of wanted to get clarity on whether rail facilities are good to go, or kind of what the thought behind non-rail infrastructure language at the at-risk coastal infrastructure activities is.
The eligible activities that is included, we took from that Protect interim guidance, or not interim, it was the Protect implementation guidance. And so I took those because I thought it was like, wow, this is great. It sort of has like project ideas or potential examples that applicants could refer to. And I don't know exactly why that rail infrastructure is called out specifically for the at-risk coastal activities, but not throughout the rest of Protect. So I appreciate you drawing my attention to that. That's something I'll have to ask FHWA and get you an answer.
Yeah, mostly just wanted to confirm whether or not a rail infrastructure that's at risk coastal infrastructure is eligible for this program, and why or why not.
Okay. Unless Teresa, if you're still on, do you know at all? I don't remember.
No.
I don't
And
think, no.
I think that's a good comment. So we need to look into that. Thank you.
Thank you.
We got another question from Rachel asking, are levee floodgates at road and rail crossings eligible facilities?
I don't know specifically. Let's see. At road and rail crossings, I believe they are. I'll have to double check though.
We have to question first, are they public facilities? So if they're a public facility and it's a transportation infrastructure that is at risk due to climate, most likely, yes.
She says thank you. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions at this time or hands raised.
I'm not sure if Rebecca froze on us.
Oh, she may have.
Yeah, so just to maybe close, we will be sending out a calendar for our office hours. Most likely they will be in the middle of maybe in the next couple of weeks, after the commission meeting. That's what we anticipate. We think maybe a couple of weeks where we will send notifications to everyone and do office hours, so that if you're interested in talking about your project, you can contact us and we can schedule maybe in a 1-hour slot. So stay tuned. We heard your comments. We'll incorporate or clarify as much as we can. And I think that's it. I want to thank everyone for participating. This was a really good discussion. And please feel free to reach out to Rebecca and or me. And we would be happy to kind of chat with you if there's things that we need to chat more on certain areas. Thank you. And I think we're done in 3 minutes ahead of schedule. All right. Thank you, everyone.